It gives me immense pleasure to welcome everyone here today, especially Donald Wheeler Davidson, grandson of James Wheeler Davidson, and his wife Leslie. A very warm welcome to you all. Both have long and distinguished Rotary careers, including being past presidents of the Rotary Clubs of Ladner and Chivasan. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Leslie, of course, will be introducing our guest speaker for today, Dr. Robert Lampard, in a little while. I also welcome Dr. Robert Lampard of the Rotary Club of Red Deer, Canada. Robert has spent many years researching James Wheeler Davidson and has until now published 2 books. I believe there is one more on the way. Robert is probably the single biggest global authority on JWD and his long-lasting effects on Rotary in true service above self spirit. I haven't really been able to see everybody here today, but I'd like to welcome Consul General of Canada, Ms. Annie Dubé. She is known to many of us through a very active support of the Terry Fox Runs, organized for raising money for children's cancer research at the Tata Memorial Hospital. Also, a very warm welcome to Consul General of Israel. He was to see us here today. I hope he is here with us. Mr. Jakob Finkelstein. He has actively supported our recent sister club agreement with Rotary Club of Jerusalem. Mr. Jakob, you will be happy to know that we have recently signed a similar agreement with the Ramla Rotary Club as well. A very warm welcome to all our fellow Rotarians from near and far who are associated with the James Wheeler Davidson founded clubs. I know you are here from Jerusalem, Melbourne, Kuala Lumpur, Bangkok, Yangon, Cairo, Hong Kong, Penang, Nigeria, and many, many other places in the world. If I missed out any country or city of yours, please do forgive me, but you're all very, very welcome today. If you recall, a few months ago, the Rotary Club of Bombay, together with the Rotary Club of Madras, had initiated the formation of the JWT affiliation. And I hope we will all reach out to one another in the near future to work together on joint projects whenever the opportunities arise. We are all here today due to the vision of a single man who traveled this part of the world 91 years ago and under very difficult circumstances. He did so as he believed in the ideals of Rotary when it was not very well known globally. Well, today we are looking forward to hearing we're here today to hear Dr. Robert Lampard share his JWD journey on the Marco Polo of Rotary. However, before I do that, and before we all hear him, I would request Honorary Secretary Satya Nisrani to please make birthday announcements.
Thank you, President Famrose. Members celebrating their birthdays during the week. On the 24th, that is today, we are celebrating the birthday of Rotarian Pratap Padode. Tomorrow, 25th, Rotarians Farooq Balsara and Anil Goel. On the 26th, Rotarian Natwarlal Brahmbhat. On 27th, Rotarian Samir Kaji. On 29th, Rotarian Charu Agarwal and Rotarian Dr. Ashish Contractor. And on the 30th November, Rotarian Bipin Wazirani.
Thank you. Well, I wish you all a very happy birthday and many more years of active Rotary service. May I now call upon Rotarian Christopher Blumel, Chairman of the International Services Committee, to please introduce Ms. Leslie Abramson. Chris? Christopher, you may have to unmute yourself.
Am I now audible?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. So again, good evening, friends, if you're to the east. Good morning, friends, if you're to the west. Good day, friends, if you're anywhere in the middle of our today's 18 time zones. I have the great pleasure to introduce our all-Rotarian forefathers, James Wheeler Davidson's grandson and wife. Donald Wheeler Abramson is JWD's grandson. Don was a president of the Latner Rotary Club. Until today, he remains active there. Donald Wheeler Abramson is married to Leslie Wheeler Abramson. Leslie is a founding member and past president of the Rotary Club of Tsawwassen, British Columbia, Canada. She too remains very active in her club. Leslie and Don are retired and have 2 sons and 5 grandchildren. Both of them live Rotary every day, as if it would be the most natural thing in the world. Both of them make everyday service above self-pay. James Wheeler Davidson has another grandson, Ricky. He and his family live in Quebec, Canada. He also has a granddaughter, Heather. She and her family live in Australia. Back to Leslie and Don. Leslie told me yesterday that every room in their home has some Rotary memorabilia that was from Grandpa's trip. That is all the more remarkable as neither Don nor Leslie were on any of these strenuous trips during a time when traveling was still such a big deal. Yet they feel so strong and closely connected to their grandpa, the man that was so instrumental in bringing Rotary to this side of the world, the Marco Polo of Rotary, as Paul Harris first dubbed him. The fact that tonight there is still so much of him in Leslie's and Don's home, and that, against all odds, we are so many of us tonight, only underlines that grand vision. Leslie and Don, thank you so much for being with us. We know that it's very early in Canada. Over to you.
Thank you very much. We are truly honored. And I know that Grandpa Davidson would be he's shining down on all of us and all of you for the work that you're continuing to do that when he planted the seeds. So thank you very much to all of you. But a real special thanks to Bob Lampert. I first met Bob when he was at a conference in Vancouver and he phoned to talk to somebody from the Abramson family about, he was writing his book. So he came out and we had coffee and it went from there. Bob is such an easy person to talk to. He's so keen, he's so interested. And the fact that he took this Grandpa Davidson to heart and wrote all about him, we are, as a family, could not be happier. At that time, I said to Bob that there was a mountain. We thought there was a mountain that the Canadian government had named a mountain after Grandpa Davidson in the Rockies in Alberta. But we couldn't find, my husband Don goes up in the Rockies and rides horses, and he couldn't find that mountain anywhere on a map. Well, I told Bob, you know what happened after that? He's a hiker. He went on and he found the mountain, and he had the government go ahead and re-gazette it on the maps. And now Mount Davidson is on all the maps in Canada. So Bob, thank you very much. You guys, we couldn't have a better speaker to talk about Grandpa Davidson, who started Rotary in all the 32 countries. Bob, over to you. Unmute, Bob.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, great. Well, thank you very much for those kind words, Leslie. I can't believe it is now 20 years since you rather innocuously, as I was leaving, asked me for a picture of Mount Davidson for Dawn for Christmas. And that's what started all this. My special thanks today to Chris for organizing it, and to NK for your networking initiative, and to a third Indian, NT Joseph, who apparently was raised in Madras or went to school there, for the book that he wrote on James Wheeler Davidson back in 1983. And welcome to all the Zoomers. My screen says there's 138 on board. But my focus this morning will not initially be on the decade of 100th anniversaries of the Davidson clubs, rather on the decade, a century ago, when RI was trying to circumnavigate the globe with Rotary clubs. The on-the-ground leader was JWD, who formed a record 32 clubs. And his mentor was Dr. Crawford McCullough, who organized the the Davidson-Ralston trip to Australia in 1921. Davidson followed it by initiating or chartering another 5 clubs in Canada in 1923-4, and then the 23 clubs that he formed on his 30-month trip to the Middle East and Far East. And as a result, Rotary remains the only worldwide service club that is adapted to the times and survived. So let's place ourselves in James and Lillian's 1930s shoes. Their travel, of course, was by water, land, and local airlines. And sometimes they had to use push cars, camels, and elephants. Their communication with RI was by telegraph and snail mail, which could go to the wrong hotel or the wrong Davidson. Rotary had pre-authorized $8,000 to cover the 12-month trip. It eventually cost $250,000, less the $32,000 that Rotary advanced. And there were superimposed events like the 1929 stock market crash, the Gandhi movement, and the Depression. But he did have 3 passports to go with him, British, American, and after 1923, a Canadian one. But in the 1920s, extension was a priority for Rotary. And for the prestige that went with it. It was competing with the Elks and the Kiwanis, to name 2. But having maxed out by what they call a contiguous or nearby expansion, they were starting to get into trouble extending it further. For instance, the Australia-New Zealand extension took multiple attempts. They'd also started a new system of appointing commissioners to avoid the rogue clubs being formed on their own, like Calgary and Calcutta. Rotary had already promised an international convention every 3 years that started in Edinburgh in 1921. And after the 1921-22 presidential year, McCullough became the first non-American chair of the expansion committee. He saw to it that Rotary charged every member $1 for extension. Rotary was ready. Well, what did JWD contribute to the exercise? A great deal. He was born in Minnesota in 1872. Big Jim, as he became known, began his international life at the age of 18 in 1890, when he began hosting VIP tours, starting with the famous Lord Stanley. And in 1892, he was selected as one of 1,500 applicants to join Admiral Perry in an expedition to find the North Pole. And it almost cost him his life. He froze his leg one night in a Greenland storm, only to be saved by his dog in the evacuation. But undeterred, he resolved to become a journalist. So he headed for the hottest spot in the world that he could find, and that was China. When that war was settled, as he was heading there, he went to Taiwan instead, just before the Japanese invaded it. He turned Taipei over to them without any loss of life. In appreciation, the Emperor of Japan gave him the 5th Order of the Rising Sun, and he was only the 2nd foreigner to ever receive such recognition. But curious, he joined the Japanese army as the lieutenant, learned Japanese, and documented his observations as he went down the island. In 1896, he accepted a consular appointment offer from the United States government. At the same time, he worked on and eventually completed his book. We're missing our pictures, which India has kept in print.
Ask if your screen is being shared.
Is my screen being shared okay?
Are the pictures showing?
Are the pictures showing?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. Then you need to-
Yeah, it's being shared.
There we go. Just a minute, I'm just scrolling down my pictures, sorry. Whoops. Yeah. There we are. Sorry, you'll have to go down one another floor. My apologies for that. I'll just catch up on the pictures that I had meant to share with him.
Tell me where.
One more. His famous book, Formosa, Past and Present, India has kept in print and it still remains purchasable. In 1903, he took a sabbatical. He rode the new Trans-Siberia Railway all the way to St. Petersburg and to London to receive a fellowship in the Royal Geographical Society for mapping Formosa. By 1905, he was the acting chief consul in Shanghai. And he was offered the inspectorship of consuls from Cairo to Shanghai, but he declined after he developed typhoid fever. And he returned to the United States on a stretcher, only to meet and be nursed by his future wife, Lillian Dow. In 1906, he returned to San Francisco a day after the famous earthquake, found his way into the city and found Lillian and her family and extricated them from amongst the fires. Married, they moved to Calgary, where his specialty became selling railway grant lands, of which he managed to sell 750,000 acres. To serve the new homesteaders, he built a lumber company. Then after World War I, his focus became Rotary. He joined the club, the Calgary Club in 1914, becoming its president in 1919. Then he published Rotary as an International Power in the Rotarian. And he closed his article with a very insightful observation: mutual understanding is the greatest of all factors in the development of international friendship. It must come largely by the personal interchange of ideas, and guess what Rotary can accomplish. That principle has guided him the rest of his Rotary life, as it does ours today. Davidson went on then and was elected the Western Canadian District Governor in 1923. And simultaneously, he was appointed to the PR, Finance, and Extension Committees at RI, becoming its third vice president in 1927. But that year at the Ostend Convention, he finally agreed to extend Rotary Clubs, or at least try, from Prague to Shanghai. In preparation for what became a 1928 trip, he sold his company to his staff. He wrote up a business plan, which he then had the Extension Committee and RI board sign off. At the same time, they appointed him the honorary commissioner from North Africa to the Pacific Islands. And then he went searching for contacts, testimonials, and letters of introduction. He would acquire them by the hundreds from Rotarians and leaders around the world, starting with one king, 3 prime ministers on down. Loaded, he wrote out his first set of principles. The important one being that there shall be included in all clubs local citizenry. Then in August 1928, they left Montreal, spent a month in Britain and Europe securing more letters, and then they headed out to their first club formation in Istanbul. Turkey became his low point, however. He could not get President Kemal to agree to a Rotarian club in Turkey. So with no approval, after 6 weeks, he left for Turkey, and that comparatively became his highlight, where he managed to bring the 2 warring Republican and Royalist leaders together. They met for the first time in years as members of the new club. Then he went on to Cairo and he reorientated the brand new Cairo club from a social to a community-focused one that included Egyptian members. He did all this by Christmas time. To start the Jerusalem club, though, he had to accept over 20% of members as being government employees, but it worked. Then he went on to Damascus, Baghdad, and Tehran, where he found that the only eligible members would be government employees, so he passed up the opportunity to form a club. But by this time, he was realizing that he was having to break RI rules or abandon potential clubs. Waiting for an invitation, he found, was not going to happen. Using a more disciplined approach of trying to form a club every 3 weeks, he developed a plan which would create a working committee, and then he would, from them, generate names of potential members. Then he would interview each one for an hour. He held 2,200 interviews, and only a few did not become Rotarians. What a remarkable achievement. He arrived in Bombay on February the 9th, 1929, during a week of religious riots. There were 70 burials the first day he arrived. He realized that bringing Hindus and Mohammedans together would be a challenge, but he was up for it, even though 4 attempts had already been made and failed. And then he noted there would be a distinct weather problem as the weather seasons changed considerably through the year. And finally, he realized the trip was going to cost him more because it was going to last a lot longer. Living at the Taj or staying there was $10 a day, and hiring a taxi driver in his car was another almost $10 a day. But that was needed because at that time there were no street names in Bombay. So he rented an old Hudson and a driver for $5 a day, and then he went looking for a solar toupee. If you could tell me in the Q&A what that is. His target was high-class members. But by the March 19th charter luncheon, he had 38 members on board, including 4 knights, 1 Parsi, and no retailers, as he called them. The club chairman was the public utility chair, a chap named C.N. Moberly, who agreed, but only after Davidson approved a summer closure period. Bombay, as he said, was a hard nut to crack, but its success had raised his reputation back in the United States such that Paul Harris asked him to begin writing articles for the Rotarian, which he politely declined. But he did ask his wife, who was an English major from Berkeley, if she would, and fortunately she agreed. The club expanded so rapidly that a year later, when RI President Pascal visited, there were 106 members with 9 different nationalities. And there was only one club in Rotary that eclipsed them, that being Singapore with 28. After his Bombay time, he went on and formed a club in Delhi. He went off and visited Calcutta, down to Madras to form their club, took a break at Octomund, and then he headed for Colombo, where bad press was preceding him. So he started with the newspaper owner, not only convinced him to join the club, but also to loan him his car for while he was there. But the funds were dwindling, so the Davidsons sold Lillian shares in her family company before they went off to Berlin, Malaysia, and then the hardest nut to crack, which turned out to be Singapore. That followed with trips to Bangkok and Indonesia, Hong Kong, and Taipei, where he started clubs. And then he exited after going to Indonesia to head for Japan and Manila, and then headed home. But he returned by this time with a tumultuous welcome, prompted primarily by the articles that Lillian was writing almost monthly in the Rotarian magazine, starting in February. On their way back by ship, they started receiving congratulatory letters, including this one from Paul Harris, along with every board member. Harris, as you see on the bottom, called him the missionary par excellence, ambassador of international goodwill. What a lovely testament. They arrived in Vancouver and Rotary had shut down, and jumped on the train, and everyone headed for Vancouver just to meet him. A little later, Davidson would then visit Chicago and present his own, by this time, 27th report. But unfortunately, his health was failing. So his wife Lillian gave the 1932 convention, Seattle Convention speech, as he was unable to go over his doctor's orders. Their daughter, the health costs during the trip had been high, and their daughter Marjorie had developed dengue fever in India, and it recurred in Malaya. This time she passed it on to her parents. Then they had a near tragic car accident. According to the subscript, the Davidsons are still under that car. He developed a kidney stone in Indonesia, which didn't help, and his congestive heart failure was progressing, and he unfortunately would pass away from it in Vancouver in 1933. The impact on Rotary was significant. JWD asked RI to backtrack him, which they did, starting with President Pascal, who put in 60,000 miles and planted 52 trees by the time he got to the Seattle Convention. He was followed by Harris in 1935 and McCullough in 1936. Davidson encouraged more chartering trips and managed to get his clubmate Doug Howland to charter 7 more in India and Pakistan alone in 1933. And the Canadian Geographical Survey named a mountain after him in 1934, but the name never reached the map. It was another 70 years before the error was discovered. That led to 24 Rotarians climbing or helicoptering into the saddle below the summit 70 years later in 2003, including Don Abramson and his 2 sons. And we had a meeting on the top. And then we celebrated by phoning people around the world, sometimes in the middle of the night. But the trip managed to change Rotary too. The classification rules were expanded to allow different ethnic backgrounds in one club. The charter size limit was increased to 40. Summer breaks were allowed, and the 20% cap was removed. And the language of the meetings were to depend on the local language, not English. Lillian's 30 articles were eventually reprinted in her book after JWD passed away in 1934. And now 23 of his 32 chartered clubs still exist, providing the foundation for the Rotary eradication program. In my view, JWD was, I think we're missing one. My picture of the Marco Polo of Rotary, which is the title of an article written on him in 1980. Fortunately as well, though, the Abramson family have donated their Rotary archives to the University of Calgary, who prepared an accession statement, which is available for future researchers. I view our opportunity today as fourfold. Firstly, to create and continue this network and raise Davidson's profile in Rotary, to develop a website about Lillian and James, to plan centennial projects. Ours is an environmental center, and it will take 6 years to fund and create. Another venture is to fund chairs in his name, which the Rotary Club of Calgary have looked at, and to designate more scholarships that focus on his focus, which is peace, goodwill, and mutual understanding. We can also make awards in his name, like the Canadian Zone has done, for membership increase by a club. Second is to celebrate the 100th anniversaries that are coming up, starting with Australia and New Zealand next year. Their anniversary project has already been determined to be extending their Pacific Island vaccination program to another 100,000 students, to which the Rotary Club of Calgary has already made a commitment. The Canadian clubs, of course, will celebrate their 100th in 2023, and the Middle East, Far East clubs start theirs in 1928. The third opportunity is to meet like we are today and at Rotary conventions starting in Taipei next year, or at the Calgary Convention in 2026, if you're thinking that far ahead, where you can have your picture taken with the JWD mural, visit a JWD display at the university, or take your photo of Mount Davidson, which you can see from Calgary. Although the 9,600-foot elevation gain may be a little too early in the season. And lastly, there's the opportunity to write some more books, of which a biography of Davidson is needed. I will complete in the next year my backtracking his 1928 trip and publish it. Let me conclude with a brief note about James and Lillian. As they inspired Rotary then, so they become a role model of commitment and goodwill for all of us today. They achieved it by interpreting fellowship as friendship and by making new friends, the title of her book. The circumnavigation of the world with Rotary Clubs remains a testament to their faith in Rotary and to their passion for it. For as Crawford McCullough recounted in his 1934 Rotary Convention address, he has done a great service. How great will perhaps never be measured. And withal, he is the most modest of men. I believe he succeeded where no one else could. My thanks then to all of you for zooming in, for your commitment to implementing future JWD Club related events and activities. And until we meet more personally, it's Q&A time, Chris. And if need be, I have pictures from the climb of Mount Davidson in 2003. There you go, Chris. Thanks again for the opportunity. NK, keep up the good work. Okay. Sorry, I can't hear you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much. Right. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Can you hear us now? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Have you received your package yet?
Not yet, but it will be. I will get it somewhere. Don't worry about it. I will get it. I will follow up on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm quite looking forward to it.
A belated birthday present.
Yes.
Fali, I'd just like to mention.
Go ahead, please.
That Robert had asked what a solar toupee was. It's a hat.
Just a hat?
Yeah, just a hat. It was a very stiff
I prefer hat. I prefer his description. You're right, he was rarely hatless.
Well, it's a particular kind of hat designed for this weather.
The heat.
And to protect the heads of people who come from less sunny climates.
Yeah.
Well, let's open up the meeting today for questions. If anyone has a question, please go ahead. Who is that?
President?
Yes.
Mudit.
Go ahead, Mudit. Please go ahead.
You should have guessed.
Yes, President Famrose, thank you for getting this organized. My question to Robert is, yours is a labor of love. How many years did it take to write this book? And what were your emotions and any other experiences you felt while writing this? Thank you.
Well, you're right. It's an interesting story, not just that it started 20 years ago with that question from Leslie. When I realized, when I very fortuitously found that there were 3 Mount Davidsons in Canada, the fourth one, the one that should have been in Alberta, didn't appear on the maps. And I managed to find the date which suggested when they were going to make the appointment. And eventually I got the Royal Geographical Society or the Geological Survey's actual minutes, and I saw how they made their error. But it was in November, and it gave me a chance to do a first ascent with the new name the following summer. So I actually climbed the mountain a month ahead of time. And then so there was a route because there was no known route. And then I sent an offer out to people who would be interested if they'd like to climb it. So between walking in, climbing in, helicoptering partway or helicoptering all the way, we managed to get 24 of the 25 Rotarians to the top for the meeting. It was a remarkably beautiful day. So we celebrated ad nausea at the top and had our little meeting and before heading down. One of the highlights to me was twofold. One is when the Abramsons presented me with a vest jacket with the name Davidson on it, although I was a little embarrassed that I was the only one getting it. The other was we had a satellite phone, and we phoned people who were related or who knew about Davidson and the Davidson story from around the world. And I remember waking up Clem Renouf at 4 in the morning in Australia. He begrudgingly said hello and put the phone down. And I phoned Bashai Radical in Thailand, as he was the incoming RI president that year. So those were a couple of the highlights. I did go back and reclimb the mountain in 2005, which is Rotary Centennial. And we had a great party celebrating that occasion with the Rotary Club of Calgary. So those are some of the highlights that followed from it. Every time I can actually see Mount Davidson from my front doorstep 130 miles away. So it's a very prominent peak. They were very, very fortunate to get the name attached to it and then not have it named twice. So that's a bit of the background to it. It's now on the maps, and there's 4 Mount Davidsons in Canada.
Thank you, Robert. Shrikant, did you have a question?
I do. Thank you, President. And Robert, that was an excellent presentation. I'm Srikant, past president of the Rotary Club of Madras, another James W. Davidson club. Now, as you know only too well, in places like India, the number of Rotarians is growing very rapidly, and yet that's not what the case is in most of the West. The overall numbers of Rotarians is dwindling. How do you think we could have another JWD to increase the numbers of Rotarians in the West particularly?
Well, what I found is that what you put into it, you get out of it, or vice versa. This has become my highlight in my Rotary activities. And when I was asked to give a summary of what Rotary meant to me, I started with this story. So I think that there has to be, as there was in his case, an innate determination, an innate passion. And then it has to fit with what it is you want to do and achieve. When I completed the book as a centennial project for Rotary in Alberta, which shared their centennial in 2005, it struck me that nobody had gone and retraced Davidson. That was just an idea that kind of fell out of my approach to him, having completed the book. And I've now made several visits to Australia and Thailand to visit Rotarians, and it's an inspiration. The reception you get, the people you meet, it's way beyond a calling card or a carrying card. That's the community, that's the brotherhood that JWD hoped would form, and that clubs would interrelate, would interconnect, would talk about each other. And this profile, he actually envisaged, and he talked about how clubs could create an international day within their program and bring in speakers. And now with Zoom, you can do this. I noticed that in my communication with the Melbourne Club, they're planning a JWD day. And I have to say very frankly, it's been terribly exciting to see how each of the clubs have responded to just being connected again as Davidson had connected them. Does that increase your membership? It does if you meet some of those conditions. And I guess it will, as it has with Leslie and I and Dawn, has wedded us to Rotary. I suppose the last thing is just the serendipitous, in terms of timing, event that's come out of this was the first future president of Rotary International being a lady, and that being Jennifer Jones. And somehow it was the Davidson story that somehow reached her as she was preparing Canadian Rotary stories for the 2010 convention in Montreal, and asked me if I would come down and help make a disc, which I still have copies of. For that convention, we passed out 5,000 discs on the history of Rotary. in Canada. I mean, that said, it's an individual journey, but it's certainly what you make of it. And in my case, it's still unfolding, and I think will continue forever. I've also sensed that there's a significant cultural difference, that the Rotary culture fits in very well in India in terms of meeting, in terms of people enjoying getting together, in terms of the agendas they put together. And it's been a revelation for me just to see how the Bombay and Madras clubs have taken the precepts of Rotary, put them together, and how mature their agendas are, and how sensitive they are to their own history, more so than the rest of us, as I discovered when I approached the Rotary clubs in Canada that he formed. Some of them didn't even know they were JWD formed clubs, like the club in Dauphin. I just knew that it was getting to be 100 years old. So then when they went back and looked up the roots and the local newspaper stories about it, then they realized how significant their chartering was.
There's a question asked. That's a good question.
Thank you.
Richard Denton, you had a question? Richard?
Yes. Thank you very much to my fellow countryman, Robert. I'm a doctor in Ontario, Canada. Two questions. One, if you could put your contact information so that we can get you as a speaker to our club would be helpful. Second, what was Lillian Davidson's response from Rotary being a woman back in those days when it was a man's world? You said that she did a lot of the talking for Jim and did a lot of the writing. And I was just curious as to what Rotarians' response were to having a woman in Rotary.
Tell them I just.
Well, that's an interesting question. It was about 1927, just as they were forming the trip, that Rotary very officially, having contemplated, discussed it, argued about it, decided there would be no women in Rotary. And that was just before the trip started. So she was, and I don't know when Rotarians started as a separate organization, but you're right, women were not allowed. So she had to overcome a number of hurdles, one of which was the discussion about would she present in James Wheeler Davidson's name at the Seattle convention, and the correspondence between Chess Perry, the general secretary, and Lillian at that time is, in the context of time, is the most amusing. Like he said in one letter, you realize you'll have a microphone in front of you. It was terribly patronizing. And by this time, of course, he knew that she was a superb author. And to 6,000 Rotarians in the arena in Seattle, she presented a beautiful story, which has been reprinted in my book. So if you can get a copy of it, her actual speech is in that book. So yes, it was a problem for her, but she never flinched. When he asked her if she would write the articles, because he didn't have the time, she immediately agreed. And when I read the articles, I thought she could write better than the National Geographic articles that were being written at the time. She was an outstanding observer and writer. And as you read her actual diary, it's a very exciting read. I just wish all of it still existed, but for the parts that I have, she was just an exceptional person. And I think, as Leslie has said a number of times, they were a couple made for each other.
Thank you.
Mr. Vijay Shastri, you have a comment to make? Vijay?
Thank you, President. Yes, President, thank you very much, first of all, for organizing this. I'm the vice chair for the International Committee at Rotary Club of Brampton in Canada. And, like Robert has said, Robert, thank you very much for, first of all, enlightening at least me about JWD. Our club is one of the oldest clubs in Brampton. It's about, in Canada, about 80 years we have been as a club. But we would certainly, I go with what Shrikant has said, that in the West, we should definitely have these the JWD clubs, and I would discuss this at our club level, and would like you to tell us, what is the way these clubs are formed, if there is any specific way of doing it, or how do we do it?
Sorry, can you just repeat? Can you just repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, Robert, I was asking that, we at Rotary Club of Brampton, if we would like to affiliate ourselves to the JWD clubs, is there a way of doing it? Is there a format, or how do we associate and affiliate ourselves as a JWD club?
Well, you firstly approach N.K. Gopinath, and as he's determining who's on the network list. I should mention I formed a club after we climbed Mount Davidson of those people that we talked to and had an interest in our climb and in Davidson. So we formed an affiliated club, and perhaps NK would consider that to expand the network to include people who are just interested in Davidson and his roots, and particularly if I can insert my secondary agenda to become acquainted with a chap by the name of Crawford McCullough, who in my view is the arch clump of, is the equivalent of the arch clump to Rotary for all that he did. But I'm sure that NK would consider creating an affiliated club of interested people and allow us to get many more clubs around the world up to speed with what we were doing, and certainly aware of Davidson and his accomplishments.
Thanks, and certainly contact Gopinath. But one more question, in case we want to organize the climb of our members to the Mount Davidson, because we are not very far from Calgary and we can be there in less than 3 hours. So if we travel by air, so will that be something which we can discuss with you, or that also has to come through the JWD clubs?
Well, it's certainly arrangeable. There's a route now because there wasn't when we started. Or you can do it like we did. Several clients walked in right from the base, as I had done. Several went into the helicopter base camp. And then 4 people were helicoptered up the saddle, which was about 700 feet from the top. So helicopters can make it that high. The 4 included one chap who was starting his cancer therapy the following Monday, one lady who had hypertension and atrial fibrillation, and most importantly, it included Don Abramson, who managed to get onto the first helicopter ride up to the saddle and was the first to ascend Mount Davidson under its new name. And that was only 3 months after he'd fractured his hip skiing. So all of us were cheering, and that was part of the celebration, was to see Don in the pictures at the top. So yes, it can be done. Takes a bit of organizing. We did end up having to eventually pay for the helicopter, but it depends. There's a route that I can outline for you. I have gone in and out in a day, but you do need a 4x4 to get in there and roughly know how to do it. But
Thanks,
it is doable.
Thanks a lot. Certainly, I'll be in touch with you, and we'll try and organize that from our side. Thank you. Thank you.
Ravindra Jain, you had a question. Go ahead. Ravindra, you're muted. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, good evening, sir. I'm Ravindra Jain from Yangon, Myanmar. My question is that because this COVID has changed the life, what we are, because now we will going to have a life before COVID and after COVID. So why to enhance to more Rotary Club Rotary members, why we should not be having this type of meeting when we know each other, like currently today meeting? It will enhance, more people would like to join meeting. They no need to come the physical meeting every week or bi-weekly and monthly. I think that will be a better idea to having a more Rotary member they can join. So I want to know Dr. Robert's comment on this.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'd love to see an affiliated, Davidson affiliated club form or start. And I leave that to NK, who has the master list. But I'd love to see this expand substantially, not just because of the anniversaries that are coming up and the projects. Sorry, I think something happened. Anyway, the bottom line is there are many Davidson satellite stories. For instance, I have on board a set of pictures that make a different story, and that's just about the climb of Mount Davidson. So you can actually see where it is and what it's like as you go into climb it. So I'd be delighted to share some of those subsidiary stories. And I suspect coming out of it, there'll eventually be another story that's just about backtracking Davidson and all the people that I've met at the different clubs that he formed. So there are subsidiary stories that can come out of it that can be used as themes or topics for future meetings.
I'm going to, this is Bob's wife, I'm going to poke my head in on the side. I'm looking through the chat line and many people have left their contact info and asked Bob to contact them. I have put Bob's email in there. It's probably better if you contact him because I don't think that we can get all this information off the chat line while he's speaking. So I'll put his email in again, and it's probably best those who asked for him to contact you if you contact him through the email.
So Bob, you have your own Lillian right beside you.
My own Leslie. Thanks, Don. You're right.
I'd rather be in the travels.
Abid from Cairo, you had a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm just, thank you very much, Mr. Dr. Bob, and thank you, President. My question is very simple. I am confused. How many clubs, Rotary clubs, did David Wheeler Charter, Davidson? I read in Rotary International 23 clubs in 12 countries. And one other day I heard 33 clubs, and today I heard 32 clubs. I'm a little bit confused on my search. So if you can, Dr. Robert, enlighten this for us, will be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. He didn't manufacture clubs. He just chartered them. There's a, yeah, there can be an argument about one or two, like I don't include Red Deer in the list, although he came and he spoke at our charter meeting, but he gave the charter credit to his colleague, Jeff Lydiat, who appears in that mural picture of Davidson. But the answer is 32. And the total is derived from three different chartering ventures. The first was the 4 clubs in Australia and New Zealand that he chartered in 21. The second were the 5 clubs he chartered, which set a record for Canadian chartering in 1923-24 when he was the district governor. So that's another 5. That's a total of 9. And then there's the 23 that he formed in the 1928-31 trip. So it comes out at 32. And then
Thank you, sir.
You can argue about Lahore and Calcutta, and there's some other ones you can argue about, but that's basically the total that he takes credit for is 32. And it is a Rotary record. The largest other figure I've ever seen is about 15 or 16. I think Holland 15, and there was a chap from Mexico who incorporated 16 clubs in South America and Latin America.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr.
If you memorize the 32 figure, and then the other is 23 clubs in 12 different countries from that 1928 trip.
Thank you, sir.
NK Gopinath, your question next.
President Fali, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to put the record straight. Bob, I'm not the final word on this, as to who should be there or who shouldn't be there in the JWD grouping. It's a collective decision. It's just that, when we started this grouping, of which we have 19 clubs on board, we said that the basic tenet should be the clubs formed by James Wheeler Davidson, and that's period. That's what it is. Now, there are a few clubs like Delhi and Myanmar who went defunct and started as a completely new club with a new charter. Now, we discussed them also and said, now, what do we do? They're technically not a James Wheeler Davidson club anymore, but then we could always think about this. So we've not taken a final decision on this. And as far as getting Brampton in, that is completely, as far as, it's technically not possible because you're not started by James Wheeler Davidson. Except that Bob was talking of an affiliate club, which we can definitely look into and see how we can bring in affiliates to the James Wheeler Davidson grouping. This grouping has just started. We would like to kind of run it by for a few more years probably before we see how to work it out. And this is, again, as I said, it's not a single person's decision. It's a collective decision of all the clubs that have initially formed the James Wheeler Davidson grouping. So I hope I put the record straight there. And as far as the number of clubs are concerned, you're spot on, Bob. It is 32 overall and 23 in this region. Thank you.
Thank you, NK. Do we have any more questions? Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
I just want to thank Gopinath for clarifying, but certainly, if you can't become a club because it was not formed, Rotary Club of Brampton was not formed by JWD, you can certainly be an affiliate.
Yeah, we can definitely kind of look into that because that's a new, suggestion given by Bob. We will definitely look into that when we are going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Bob. Go ahead.
One interesting side story, and I didn't really pick it up in my presentation, but one of the very unusual stories to fall out of the Davidson story was about a lady by the name of Marmee Hess. And in that picture of the people who climbed Marmee, we nominated her as our chef de mission. Her connection, though, with the Davidsons was personal. Her father and Jim Davidson were very close friends, and both in the lumber industry. But she told the marvelous story about having parties at his home. And even though she was crowding 100, she could still remember playing musical chairs in his home as he played the organ. And she always loved to tell the story about how she wanted to be the first to lose at the chair story because the one chair had been removed. So that way she could sit on his knee while he played the organ for all the other students. And she loved to tell that story. But what was really impressive was that she was there to personally give us a direct relationship with JWD, despite it being 70 years later.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for that. I don't think we have any more questions, Bob. You're off the hook now.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead, Shab. Go ahead.
Can I have the last one?
Of course.
Yeah. No, I just heard what Gopinath said about the membership criteria, like which clubs are going to be the part of this group. But Rotary Club Yangon, which was probably at that time Rotary Club of Rangoon, Burma, has probably a different scenario because it was defunct not because of like the club abandoning being a Rotary Club, but I think because of all the government martial law and political changes, probably the Rotary itself was banned in this country. So maybe this should be considered because we got the charter now again. RI gave a different name definitely because now Rotary Club of Rangoon cannot be a club because the Rangoon doesn't exist anymore. It's Yangon now. So Gopinath, I think maybe you have to consider that.
No. Nothing is close, Shabazz. We will definitely look into that and collectively take a decision for sure. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Shabazz.
President,
Yes.
if I may, there have been a number of invitees from my side who I invited on your behalf. I would like to
Certainly.
recognize their presence if you have the time.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay, I'll quickly go through the list of the invitees that I invited and who are here on the call. We have Jacob John from Vellore, Gopal Panthi from Nepal, Vijay Shastri from Brampton, Canada, Badar Shamim from Brampton, Ganesh, PDG Ganesh from Merthyr Tydfil of UK, Wales, Tony Sharma from Towers Hamlets of London, and Sundar Ramanathan from Delhi, and I'm sure there are other people he had invited from Delhi. Kadaba Vasudev from Palatine. There's another name to this club, Palatine, UK. Then we have Shabazz from the Yangon Club. He's past district governor again from Karachi earlier. And Niti Murugesu from the current president of Colombo. And we have Anne Frisch. I had invited her. I'm not sure, maybe others have invited also. She's there. PDG Ijeoma from Nigeria. And we have Sai Nathan from Chennai Chola, Narsimha Joshi from Belgaum, Sharmila from Towers Hamlets, London, YR Bakshi from somewhere up north, I forget the name of the club, Ananta from Fresno North. He's 13 and a half hours behind us. He's in California and he's on the call. Ramesh from Icons Coimbatore, and Vidya from Temple City, Chennai, Madras Temple City, Bhaskaran Pillai from Kerala, DGE Alka from a Rotary Club of Kiokak, which was the club which started the peace pipe, back in 1930. And then we have Daksha from Meenambakam, Madras, Vakar from Stockton, from California, and we have Ramachandran from Nagarkoil down south in Tamil Nadu, and Richard Kalunji from Kampala South, Uganda. These are the names I could note down who have come in through my invitations on your behalf. So if I have missed someone, I welcome you on behalf of President Fali and the Rotary Club of Bombay. Thank you, President.
Thank you, NK. Thank you so much for inviting them and for acknowledging them. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
May I now request Director Meera Alreja to kindly propose a vote of thanks.
Sure, Fali. That was a heartwarming overview of the pioneering efforts of James Wheeler Davidson, who spread the Rotary movement across the globe. And it was all the more special to listen to his interesting journey through you, Dr. Bob Lampard, who studied him so passionately and so closely. You have actually steered us back to our roots. The authentic peek that you gave us into the enthusiasm that James Davidson had way back in the 20s and 30s makes us feel all the more responsible as Rotary Clubs of Marco Polo vintage. We are ignited by your chat with us today. I'm sure all our clubs represented here will accelerate their efforts to make the world a better place to live in for our brethren. Thank you so much, Dr. Bob Lampard, for your time, for agreeing to be with us from across half the globe and inspiring us to reinforce our commitment to this great movement that is Rotary. We are privileged to have you, Donald and Leslie Abramson, with us today. It is really a great honor. A special thanks to the Consul Generals of Canada, Mrs. Anne Dubé, and Israel, Mr. Jakob Finkelstein, for their gracious support. You strengthen the bond between your countries and those represented here. And a warm thank you to all our sibling JWD clubs for joining us in reviving memories of the history we share in common. Thank you, each and every one of you, for an enjoyable get-together this evening or this day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meera. Thank you for that. May I now request Honorary Secretary Satya Nisrani to make club announcements.
Thank you, President Primrose. Dr. Lampard, as a token of our appreciation for spending this time with us, the members of our club and various other clubs around the world, on your behalf, we will be lighting up a rural household using solar power. We'll be sending you the certificate in due course.